Yeah.
Welcome everyone this evening. It's a great delight for me personally to introduce Sue Cerulean as our speaker tonight. She is a writer, she's a naturalist, she's president of St. Vincent's Island Foundation. She's a caregiver of her family and of the earth. And she will present to us her writings of I've Been Assigned as the Single Bird, that relates to her care of her beloved father and of the island. So with great joy, Sue, thanks. Thanks a million for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me back again. I'm going to try to share my screen now.
Okay, please come on. Please, please.
It's always amazing when it works. I'm so grateful to you all for the climate change work that you're doing on behalf of the earth and on behalf of our children's children and the unborn of all species waiting for their chance at the kind of life that we've been privileged to lead. So what I'm going to do tonight is share several passages from my most recent book, I Have Been Assigned the Single Bird, with you, and raise some of the issues that writing this book has brought me. And then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. Does that sound good, everybody? Good? So we're going to start with, this is a David Moynihan photo of St. Vincent Island taken from Indian Pass, and most of the images that I'm using tonight are his. So this is to give you a sense of the setting where a good bit of this book takes place. I floated in my kayak on the azure gulf near a place where least terns nest on the shore. I chose a distance that would not disturb a pair of courting birds standing on the shining sand. The female shirred her wings, fluttering soft and receptive, like a dove, and the male stood before her. His bill pinched a living fish the size of a soup spoon, and as he moved his head side to side to tempt his mate, the last angling of the sun struck the body of the fish. It appeared that the tern offered elemental silver to his mate. She accepted his nourishment, both actual and ritual. Fish dies into bird, bird fertilizes an egg, and life proceeds through the intricate lovemaking of terns and the sacrifice of small fish. The terns bind to one another, vowing to protect and feed a pair of chicks until the chicks can arrow the waters from the bow of the air and confidently obtain food for themselves. So there's a very young chick between its parents. And this picture, the chick is getting ready to fledge and one of the parents is feeding it. Such devotion is what continues life on this planet. For me, being close to the doings of wild birds is one of the most awesome gifts that life has given me. So in Single Bird, I have paired the story of that gift with the caregiving of my father, who died of complications of Alzheimer's disease in 2012. Isn't he sweet? I just think he's so sweet. At the time of my father's illness, at this time pictured, my father's illness was really beginning to affect his life. And he was in New Jersey living with his wife, Mary Jane. And I was here in Tallahassee writing books about nature in Florida and working as a wildlife biologist at the State Wildlife Agency. My husband, Jeff, and I were also launching our teenage sons and making the transition to empty nesting. Up in New Jersey, though, my father was getting sicker, and the tipping point came when his wife, Mary Jane, had a stroke and died unexpectedly, and someone had to step up and take care of him. And so Jeff and I decided we would like to bring him to Florida. And one of the reasons is because my dad was just such a super great father. This is a picture of him with my second sister, Roberta, who was, even though she lives in Connecticut, she was my companion of all the siblings in caring for Dad for the last 5 years of his life. But no matter how sweet he was, as any of you who have taken care of someone with some kind of dementia know, any plans you have for how it's going to go are ultimately unrealistic. And I pictured many events like this, but it wasn't always that way. His condition, I must have thought in some way that his condition would stabilize, but we were wrong about that. Sitting with my dad in the last years of his life was like sitting near wild birds. To understand his needs, I had to be still and become extremely observant. It was like a meditation practice, and it was a lot, in some ways, like looking after wild birds. One of the things that I kept an eye on was just outside Dad's window. Now, this is not the exact view, but just to remind you what kudzu looks like, which I know all you Southerners already know. But it was right out, there was a good stand of it right outside my dad's window. And it was clothing the trees, as kudzu does. And more so during the years that we were there. And so as I watched that, and I watched Dad lose his battle to the tangles and plaques of dementia, it became clear to me that humans are doing the very same thing to the earth as the disease was doing to his brain, as the kudzu was doing to the trees. And so this became the premise of my book, which is that the earth is the brain and the body into which we were born. And in some very parallel way, we face not only a crisis in the numbers of people diagnosed with dementia, 6 million right now in our country alone, but as a culture, we are stricken with this disease and its attending violence. For why else would we knowingly destroy the planet that sustains our very lives? So the two parts of my experience of my life, my experience and my dad, and my experience with watching over wild birds began to feel like they could be woven into one narrative. And so that's eventually what I did. I was still working down at the coast at the time, keeping track of numbers of wild birds nesting. And in this case, I would launch at the 10-foot hole underneath the bridge as you go into Apalachicola. And over here is a little spoil island that you can see if you're coming out of Apalachicola. You can see it off to your right, and this is where they have dredged the channel into the marinas in Apalachicola, and that is a good place for birds to nest. And so I would just paddle over there, depending on the wind and the storm and everything, and then just walk the perimeter of the island and then the interior, looking for nesting least terns, oyster catchers, black skimmers, whatever might be there. And it was really fun. But the thing is, I was also doing counts on St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge, and just studying, what's going on with bird populations. And there aren't nearly as many as there used to be. And you may have seen this information from Cornell. laboratory of ornithology. We've lost, in the last 50 years, we've lost 2.9 billion birds, individual birds. And population losses aren't restricted to rare and threatened species, but they include many widespread and common species. Now, this little adorable thing is a just hatched snowy plover. And a snowy plover is a shorebird that skitters along the beach. And it's among the birds that are my things that I observe and wrote about. And these birds, shorebirds, which includes things like willets and sanderlings and oyster catchers, they're experiencing particularly catastrophic declines. There are now 40 to 70% fewer than you would have seen 50 years ago. And their declines, of the shorebirds specifically, are related to your topic of climate change. This is, I think this picture we took at Stump Hole on Cape San Blas, but there are many places on St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge and Little St. George, where you can see evidence of sea level rising. And I know that you have been probably inundated with more than you want to about what's happening to the carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere, how it's risen from 280 parts per million to 415, maybe a little bit even higher if you were to look it up today, right this very day. And so what that means is that our atmosphere is, just to bring in a third thread, our atmosphere is becoming novel for our species. You know, and as we have learned this year, a novel threat can be a really dreadful thing, as in a novel coronavirus. But even worse is the fact that we are not acclimated as a species to live in a place this hot, and it just hasn't all caught up with us yet. But we see the storms, we read about the glaciers melting and the permafrost melting and the fires in the West, and we know it's happening. So let's return again to the idea of dementia. The word dementia comes from the Latin demens, meaning madness, or the irreversible deterioration of the intellectual properties of the brain. People that are afflicted with this disease suffer from a paradigm of perpetual growth. So in my dad's brain, as the illness progressed, the losses became physical, they became emotional, they became intellectual. And those beautiful life forces are eventually dissolved from the person. But the dementia affecting our culture is the belief that humans can take and consume whatever we like, just like the kudzu from the body of the planet. This is different than a single person being afflicted by a disease, right? Because it's the whole of us. And the principal drivers of climate change, the exploitation of people of color that has really been highlighted this year, extinction, habitat loss. The principal drivers are our own economic systems, our colonialism, our tolerance of power and greed. And we're feeling a lot better because there's hope that that's being somewhat turned around in our country right now. But I think that we still struggle with the core of this cultural dementia, and that is that we fail to understand our true inseparability from nature, which includes all races, all species, all of the earth. And we think about the earth as just the environment around us. Now I'm excluding present company, but I think in general, that's true. And so we experience ourselves and our planet as separate entities. and perhaps mostly see the planet in terms of what it can do for us. My father was dearly beloved to his family, but he was a single being with a certain fate that we will all ultimately share. But Earth's biodiversity, whole populations, whole species, whole ecosystems, our very climate, those we must and we can protect. I often think of the words of Pulitzer Prize winning writer Richard Powers in the Over story, who said this: "We are living at a time when claims are being made for a moral authority that lies beyond the human. We are living at a time when claims are being made for a moral authority that lies beyond the human." And that's where you and others involved in creation care are particularly important, because you understand the moral, spiritual basis for what needs to happen now. In the end, to me, I was taking care of my father, a single person, but nevertheless, a person with such an affliction that he required a lot of care. And I was also taking care of, to the extent that I could, single bird nests that were needed to be signed off and posted and protected from people who didn't even know that there was a nest on the ground there, or maybe in some cases had a dog that wasn't respectful of our boundaries. So those, I had this idea that I could protect these sort of single birds in my life. But in the culture, we have to transform our whole assumptions, our whole worldview, our cosmology of separation, our economies. And if we can make this shift with faith groups often in the lead, I think we can redeem ourselves. The derangement of our time is rooted in how we live. That's the difference between my dad's illness and the illness of our culture. The latter is animated by cumulative human actions. So we're here because we're concerned about the climate of the earth and the extinction crisis. And there's no question, I think all of us feel, that we're called into this service. And what form our service, our agency takes, our engagement, it will be diverse, many forms. That's how nature operates. And I've been thinking about that a lot, because it's important that we understand. I have to talk to myself about this often, that one of us can't fix the whole thing. Right now in Tallahassee, where I think probably you all are, where I am, the birds of the wintering birds, like robins and goldfinches and purple finches, they're all here from up north, and they're taking a break from the snow and they're feeding. And if you have feeders, you've seen these guys. At the same time, we have the year-round residents, like example, Carolina wren, Carolina chickadee, tufted titmouse, the woodpeckers. They're here too. And then we have a third group, which are the ones who are coming back to breed. And you can already hear pine warblers in the pine trees. You can see the tree swallows over the marshes of St. Mark's. And all of those birds are, coming at this place with a different need, and they're feeding each in their own way. And I feel like the way they do that, and then they mix, and all together they make this one beautiful biodiversity, is very similar to the way all of us who care about the earth have to work. We each bring our own way, our own gift, our own passion for the planet. And together, though, I think we have an immense power to stand up and to vote and to speak and to act on behalf of all that's sacred. I took this picture just a few days ago on Sunday. We were out at St. Vincent. And this is, you're looking far, far distance, you're looking over at the mainland. And if you could see off further to the right, there would be the town of Apalachicola. This body of water is called West Pass. And because there's so much less fresh water coming down the Apalachicola River now, this island is eroding. And this palm, it was low tide, so the water's out a bit. But I thought that this palm, there are living palms in the background, some that have been inundated and are dying. But you know, this palm in the foreground is just kind of bowing to what is. But the ones that can still stand are standing, and they're standing tall. And I always find that when I go out there in wild places that there's a message for me. Here's another one. I mean, this might look like a picture of devastation. We're kind of in the same place, but now we're looking out West Pass, and this is Little St. George Island in the background. But what caught my eye here was the way the palm hangs on. I didn't even know their roots were so long. I thought they just went straight down. But they are going to hang on until they can't hang on anymore. And that's our job. That's our job too. So I want to end by reading you a little bit, a sort of a story about grace. And it's about white pelicans and grace. So these are, again, a David Moynihan picture. And these aren't the exact birds that I'm talking about in the story, but they're the same species. And they are one of those winter birds. They're here now, and they'll be going back west to breed in a little bit. So one quiet orange sunset, I stood with my husband Jeff on the beach at Indian Pass, looking out across the water. Could those be white pelicans over on the point? Asked Jeff. We'd never seen them loafing on the wildlife refuge with their smaller cousins, the brown pelicans, but there they were, undeniable, magnificent, enormous knobs of snowy white. Binoculars brought them close. 7 white pelicans standing at the water's edge, resting and adjusting their feathers. In early spring, white pelicans depart from Florida's Gulf Coast, and they fly in long, determined squadrons to the far west, where they will nest and rear their young. We watched these unexpected holy ones prepare for that journey. As the sun began to melt into the Gulf, I closed my eyes and became simply another breathing presence on the sand, no boundaries. At last light, the 7, obviously there's more than 7 in this picture. This is what they look like. The 7 gathered up into the air, fell into a lopsided V, and flew directly over our heads. They flapped so close and so low, we could hear their great wings creaking. Gratitude brought me to my knees, for I had the privilege of sharing these rare moments with the creatures I loved. In our saltwater and bones bodies, each one of us loves the birds this much. They companion us at this time on the planet, weavers of air current and nest cup. Their songs were the first music, our first music as a species. Their call notes, the first living patterns on our collective human eardrum. We learned percussion from the woodpecker, to scream from the eagle, and to sing complicated melody from the warbler and the thrush. Just as our bodies are constructed of the dust of the stars, they also carry a memory of a time when our lives were always with the birds, out under the spread of the sky, where we live without separation. Earth gives us so many chances to open wide our minds. We are invited to say, we are taken quite outside of ourselves. Our consciousness enlarges and becomes permeable, and our thoughts relax and loosen their grip. In such moments, we are reminded that we are the universe in the form of the earth, in the form of human beings at this time and place on the planet. Earth asks us, what will you do in return to help this life continue? The roots and nesting grounds of the white pelican have been extensively mapped, but we really don't know anything of the intimacy of their journey. How it is decided who will fly with whom and how far to travel in a day, and why these 7 stopped at Indian Pass for just this hour. In a matter of days, those white pelicans would arrive at their summering grounds in Utah or Montana. In the urgencies of nest building and egg laying, they will not remember us standing under their leave-taking of the Gulf of Mexico, but perhaps our prayers for their safe passage would in some way sustain them. The white pelicans' flyover assured me that where I stood was on their map and reminded me that we share a common sacred earth, our true home and our true church. This is grace, I said to Jeff. This is a grace that we can touch, that we can trust. This is grace, a grace that we can trust, maybe touch too. So I'm going to end my solo part here, and I'd love to hear from you. Questions or your own thoughts and your own observations about how all of these stories of climate, of species extinction, of racial injustice, of political unrest, how do you see those interweaving? And what thoughts do you have about how we're going to heal all that? That's what I want to hear from you now.
Nick, do you want to unmute everybody so we can join in?
I think it might be
What's
my
the
vote.
best?
My vote would be that folks unmute as they're ready to say something.
Okay.
If we all try to talk at the same time, Zoom gets very frustrated.
Do you want us to raise our hands?
No, I think you know what? I trust this bunch. Y'all can unmute and go.
I'll begin. I'll just begin by saying how beautiful your presentation was in your words. And I feel that a couple of things that you pointed out that we certainly do emphasize in different classes that many of us take is the devotion that not only continues our species, but the devotion that we have for one another to care for the earth, to care for our individual family members and our friends, and how important that is, as some of our classmates would say, synonymous with love, but devotion for all living things makes us much more aware of how important it is that we continue to be vigilant, continue to speak out, as you said, to vote, to be participants, and to not give up, to continue to work for justice and climate justice.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with you, Maria.
Can you say again where the Pelicans, where their winter home was?
Oh, their winter home is in many of them are in the Gulf of Mexico. So between, say, the Big Bend and then all the way down in like little islands off of Cedar Key and the mouth of the Swanee River, that's where I have seen them in the greatest numbers in the winter time. And you see them coming in from the west in those big squadrons in October, November, and then they'll be leaving between the end of February through April. They'll be heading back west. It's really quite an amazing journey.
Where did they go out west?
Well, we've seen them in the high mountains of Montana, on the lakes, and the Great Salt Lake, Western Lakes, Utah, Montana are the places I've seen them.
We thought we had heard wrong.
We have a question in the chat box from Linda and Arnie Rogers. Can you comment on those who believe we can engineer our way out of every environmental problem?
Well, I don't think we can. I think that there are some fixes that are shorter term and hopefully will help. But really, I mean, what I believe is at the heart of the crisis is what the heart of the crisis we're in was not engineered. It was a way of taking. And we can't ever expect to see an end to the kind of situation we're in until we address our own sort of are really, in a way, our economic systems that allow the wealthy to take. And that is where all the justice movements are related, I think. So I don't think that we can engineer our way out of it, because if we have not changed our minds and our way of being we, and a we including all species and rivers and bodies of water and landscapes, if we can't, until we get back to that we that the native peoples had and have, then anything we do is kind of window dressing. And it's helpful if it reduces the amount of CO2 and methane in the atmosphere. You know, it's an interim fix, but we have to work at a much deeper level. I think that just is true. We are very egocentric people. Yeah, but not all of us are, right?
Susan, I just wanted to mention that I lived in Colorado for about 36 years, and I used to see snow pelicans flying over and landing on the lakes on the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains. Beautiful sight.
It is. And they're so much bigger than brown pelicans. That's the thing, right? I mean, they're just magnificent.
We have them on Lake Talquin. It's about 20 miles west of town, and we had about half a dozen yesterday. And just about this time of year, we'll have hundreds come in inland. I guess we're about 20 miles from St. Mark Wildlife Refuge, and they will frolic in the freshwater here and feed, I guess, and then make their way on. Are they already on their way north?
Well, it sounds like they are, because moving inland from you.
We used to see them in Lakeland. They fill the lake in front of the public library and a couple of other small lakes in town. Beautiful. First time I saw them, I had to stop my car and turn around and go back and look. because I didn't
Absolutely.
believe what I was seeing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We had a big flock last Sunday
In
on Lake Jackson.
in the winter, there's a
Beautiful.
whole island.
Mhm.
I give to the nature. Yes. I think
So they're on their way.
the nature.
Yeah, every
Pardon?
when I was on a retreat down at Boca Grande once at Christmas, there's a whole island filled with the white pelicans, and I think that's their winter home, I guess. And then they start migrating.
Yeah. When we were out Sunday in our boat on St. Vincent Sound, we encountered a group of 175 of them that were on one tiny little bit that was still above.
Yeah, it's just
tide.
beautiful.
To count them.
It's staggering. It is. And yes, to Dan, absolutely giving money to the Nature Conservancy is a great way to go.
Mhm.
Did your father share your love for nature?
He did. And I think that's why I kind of went the route I did, is because even though he was an engineer, he was a metallurgical engineer, and but he gave me my first bird books, and he would take us out to feel the trunks of trees so we could tell an ironwood from a tulip poplar. And both of my parents took us on out, camping vacations and to the coast and stuff. I'm sure that that's our job as grandparents when we can see our children again, Miss Dot, that we will, our job is to put their hands on the trees, definitely. And that's where I got it from, for sure.
That's a beautiful gift that he passed along.
Yeah, and it wasn't, it was just part of life. It wasn't a special, let's go out and do this kind of thing. It was just part of what we did. Yeah, it was great. He was really special.
Susan, I read your book. It was wonderful, very beautifully written. I'm curious, how hard is it to count all those birds? I mean, sometimes the numbers got pretty high. I'm just curious how you did that.
Oh, so you're probably talking about the Christmas bird count. Well, any kind of count. Well, you use a spotting scope. So I didn't have a picture of it in the, you can use binoculars for some things like white pelicans. You have this high magnification spotting scope and you set it up where there's a big congregation of birds. And then you just sort of move left to right and you figure out how many oyster catchers, how many royal terns. It's just a matter of practice. But it's something that I love to do. I'm not a professional at it, but it's something that is comforting to me to see that who's still here with us. How many of them, which ones? That's a good thing. And you can forget about that if you're in the city or in a big city. You have no idea who's still with us. And it gives us hope and sustenance to know that the white, to hear all your stories of where the white pelicans are moving just around in this Big Bend right now is a great thing.
Susan, could you say something about the effects of salinity, ocean depth, and temperature of the water around these islands as affected by climate change? Has it changed noticeably?
Well, I am not a scientist in the way that my husband Jeff is, who talked to you. He could probably answer that better. But what we have noticed in the last 10 years or so is a change in the composition of some species. Like, for example, I really like stingrays. I like to watch them. you know, as they fly along the water's edge. And they sort of go head to tail to tail, head to tail. And they migrate like birds do. But we haven't seen them at all in the last 4 or 5 years. And we know that the Gulf has gone up several degrees already. And that temperature change was suggested to me by a man who studies rays and sharks at the Marine Lab, Dean Grubbs. So it's not purely observational. I think in terms of like, there's not nearly the mullet down there that we saw 20 years ago. It has to be either food sources or temperature, which are probably related. And salinity, we know, has changed. We know in Apalachicola Bay that because of the water withdrawals in Georgia and Alabama, that much less fresh water is making it to the bay. And so that's been the setback for the oyster population and therefore the oyster industry. And that's why the oysters seasons are closed there now. So I can't give you numbers, but I know that you're right, that those things are happening. And the Apalachicola River Keepers, if you're interested in pursuing that further, they have the full the sets on that. But also, you know, like I showed you in one of those last few images, the lack of flow in the river has affected St. Vincent Island, and its erosion is much greater than it was 20 years ago. We just see that beach retreating and retreating. So the answer is yes. I see that put up that the Great Backyard Bird Count is this coming weekend.
Oh.
That would be a great way to get started counting birds, especially if you don't have cats in particular.
Susan, I have a favorite story I tell all the time, and I'm sure people get tired of me saying it. But I remember seeing an essay in the New York Times about a man who had fought really passionately about studying and advocating for looking at problems associated with climate change, and he just gave up. He said it was just too overwhelming, that he saw that the war was going to be lost, and that he just didn't have the energy to keep fighting. And then one day he fell in love with this bird in the backyard, and he realized that that bird was worth fighting for, even though it may be a lost cause. And he said, if I just could do enough to make sure that that bird and its descendants be alive and live flourishing lives, and that's enough for me. And I'm gonna pick up and go on. And I love that. And I've been trying to find that essay, and I've never been able to find it. But my question is there one species that you feel really passionate about, that you just love more than any other? Or do you feel the same way? Do you feel about all the species the same way? Is there one you're really close to?
Well, I really do have a great passion for swallowtail kites, and that was my first book was about them. I think that any bird that you look at closely enough, you can definitely fall in love with, just like that man. But for this week, it's definitely white pelicans. But I love oyster catchers so much, and I really love this little snowy plovers as well. The thing is, Pam, that when you let yourself fall in love like that, you be heartbroken if the birds don't make it. And instead of looking at single individuals, you know, we're also looking at whole lines, whole species. But it's worth it. You know, I would love to know more about that. We have gone to ridiculous extremes to save baby birds in our backyard. It's not ridiculous. It's from the heart, clearly. Good for you guys. So
I could see how that could be applied in education, where you would inspire children to get really excited about one type of or one species like that, to really get to know that one species, and then become, you know, a patriot for that species for the rest of their lives.
and I think children do that with, you know, we've seen manatee campaigns, and children are ready to get on that bandwagon with us with big open hearts, I think, don't you?
I do.
I do. We're so hoping to start creation care at Trinity. And I keep thinking about the young adults and the children, and taking on, let's say, a species of birds. And that would be such a wonderful way as an introduction for them to become good caregivers and learn about those particular birds.
You know, if you get to that, the Appalachia Audubon Society has a super active chapter here.
Very large. Yeah.
Yeah, large, and lots of young energy. And they're interested in, they have been interested in working in over at Lake Alberta, which is on the southwest side of town. I think it's one of those stormwater lakes, and they have taken lots of kids from poor communities out there and help them get connected with nature. But if you get that, Marianne, you should.
I do have it. I get their newsletter.
Yeah, connect with those people, because they would be a great partner. Right now, they have been really resurging in a wonderful way.
I think they call themselves the Limpkin Society.
The Limpkin something.
Is that right?
The Limpkin something. The Limpkin News.
Right.
I love Limpkins
thank you.
too.
That's a great resource.
I was in the Unitarian Church for a while, and Anne Rudlow was a member. I'm sure you know her.
Yeah.
And she wanted to get the children excited about nature. So she gave a talk one Sunday, and she had a big cooler, and she opened it up. And what kind of crab was it, Don? A hermit? It was a big helmet crab or something like that. Anyway, she took it out of the cooler, and it went down the aisle of the church. And all of the children were so excited about that, and they never forgot it. So I was just thinking, you know, that children can really get excited about this, and then they will be, you know, they will be fighting for this cause.
That's right.
Right. Our future. Thank you.
And their future.
Yeah.
That's right. Good. That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
I know we haven't been talking about deer and that sort of thing, but it's all animals. So my son-in-law is a hunter, and he does hunt deer, but once he's reached what he's supposed to be able to shoot on any given day, he sits the rest of the day in his stand and just watches. Sometimes he uses his gun sight so that he can see them better, but he watches the deer. He finds them just absolutely fascinating to do that. And of course, they do eat all of the meat, so it's not a total waste.
I used to be a volunteer on a couple of the hunts on St. Vincent National Wildlife Refuge, and invariably the hunters knew way more about what was going on in the woods than any of the other kinds of visitors to the island. They really, in order to be a hunter, you have to be able to put yourself into the mind,
Yes.
basically.
Well, he said that last year when it was so dry, there were no deer because the deer would have to go to a pond to get water, and there were alligators in the pond, and you know what happens when alligators and deer get together. And it was one of those years when that sort of culling was happening naturally because of the drought. This year, apparently it's been wet enough that they're not congregating with the alligators anymore. He's been able to watch a lot of them.
I don't know if any of you, or if you did this as a group, but last weekend I watched, it was a recording of the Dalai Lama and Greta Thunberg kind of in conversation. And there were a couple of scientists on it as well. It was really fascinating. And so if anybody wants to, you could look that up on YouTube. So you just put in Dalai Lama and Greta Thunberg, and
Okay.
just to hear their points of view and their humanity, and then also what the scientists have to say about climate change. It was pretty riveting. There's always more to learn, isn't there?
Oh, goodness.
But the harder problem is, how do we then motivate change? That's the thing that keeps me up at night.
Susan?
Yes.
It doesn't sound now.
Uh,
Okay.
I'm Duncan. I'm known as Mary Ann Moore's husband, Duncan.
Duncan. Oh, Susan.
I've met you.
It was a
Yes.
couple of years ago when we visited you and your husband gave us some lectures and so forth. But here's my question. I'm a little bit familiar with the river keepers and the battle that went, I think, to the U.S. Supreme Court over water and the river.
Apalachicola River.
Well,
Yeah.
No, it's the other, the river that emptied into the bay in Apalachicola. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. You had the state of Georgia on one side and you had the state of Alabama on the other. The solution was obvious to a layperson, and I think to any layperson, but the U.S. Supreme Court punted.
You turned it back.
They would not make the decision because of, I believe, the political and social implications that were involved. Now, having talked more than I probably should have, my question to you is this. Can you think of examples where people rising up and getting organized and getting committed have actually changed something important and meaningful?
Yeah.
Well,
The pipeline.
I'm trying to follow, and what I'm really interested in, but I haven't seen the change that we really want to see, Duncan. But there are places like Ecuador has passed legislation regarding the rights of nature. And citizen groups in Gainesville, Florida, in that area, have been trying to establish an equivalent rights for the Santa Fe River, which is where Nestle, another place Nestle wants to withdraw tons of water. I think that's a good way to go, and I know that there are people working on that all over. But Duncan, I think we're just beginning to do what needs to be done, really.
I agree.
Well, talking about getting children excited about things, the story that I heard, and I assume it's true, that back when they were working on the Cross Florida Barge Canal, and there was talk about, all the ecological effects of that, there was a school somewhere in Central Florida where the teachers had the students write to the legislators. And while the legislator knew that the kids couldn't vote, they each of them got a letter back from an aide saying, you know, thank you for your comment, blah, 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 blah. But somewhere in the back of their mind, they knew that all of these children had parents, and the parents are saying, oh, this legislator wrote to my child, and they're excited about it. So maybe they told a neighbor. Well, 6 months later, the teacher had them write another letter and ask what had been done. And that time, I mean, you know, the kids still couldn't vote, but their parents and their neighbors and their grandparents could all vote, and things began to move. So getting children excited about things is not just a one-way street. If it's harnessed well and the children are really believing what you're talking about, get letters written is not a bad thing. Probably means more than if I write.
Well, the climate movement now, a lot of the energy is coming from young people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people in high school and middle school, college. And
these were elementary kids.
Yeah. Well, I think the children now really understand that we have compromised on their future. And so they're having to get involved in a way that we didn't know. You know, thinking some more about what Duncan was saying, it was the work of Rachel Carson that banned the use of DDT. And there's been, you know, in the 60s and 70s, lots of important legislation was passed. The Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, the establishment of the Environmental Protection Agency, a lot of which was turned over by the former president and is being revived. But I think we have seen successes, and there have been quite a few species like wild turkey and quail and even deer that have been, the term that is used by biologists is recovered. So in terms of species, we know how to bring things, you know, to bring things back. It's just a matter of whether we're willing to give away the habitat that they need. And that is how you protect them, really.
The DDT is a good example. I do remember that, and how that did save the pelicans.
Yeah. The pelicans and the eagles and the ospreys. And the songbirds too.
Right.
All right, friends, I have 8 o'clock.
Oh, no, we can't stop.
I suspect we could entertain one more question if we have one. Wayne Rabanus, I see you speaking. Get unmuted and we'll
Is Wayne?
Yeah, you're muted. You're muted, friend.
Working on it. There we go.
Oh, no, I meant Wayne.
Oh, Wayne, the other way. Okay.
Yes. Uh-oh.
I don't know what's happening. Oh,
Wait, maybe you can hit the button I just asked. Okay.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
All right. No, the only comment I was going to make, I think on a positive note as we go forward, you know, we went through 8 years of one gubernatorial administration where the term climate change was prohibited to be used by the environmental agencies. And, you know, we've just been through 4 years of administration that that denies climate change. And hopefully we can get back on track. And I think that's a positive note to get everyone energized and moving in the right direction. I don't want to get too political there, but you can't avoid the obvious.
No, that's what it comes down to. There's a really good
Freaking elephant.
piece in the New York Times today about the Biden climate plan, and another good one in the Sunday Review section from Sunday about written by a man who worked in the oil industry and what he saw. So there's plenty to draw on. And once you figure out how to fix it all, please get back to me.
We'll be sure to get right back to you. Well, we've had a really wonderful series, and I just thank you, Susan, for being a part of it and closing this chapter, this short 5-week chapter. And I think we'll continue on, and the momentum's there, and I think we'll continue to grow and search and discover. And we're greatly appreciate what you've added to our evening. Thank you so much.
Thank
Lots
you so
of
much
love.
for inviting me.
Yeah.
See you
Good
all.
night, everyone. We'll be in touch.